This was supposed to be the greatest bromance in the history of psychology. This is Freud and presenting Carl Jung. They are the OG mind explorers. One obsessed with childhood trauma and the other obsessed with dreams, symbols and the mysteries of the soul. They met in 1907, talked for 13 hours straight, the first time they met. Instant connection, philosophical soulmates. Psychology's power duo. They even went on a cute little work trip to America together. Freud was like, this guy's gonna be my hire. But like all other great romances, this one ended in drama. On that trip, Freud fainted twice. Jung said it was psychological. And Freud said, don't analyze me, bro. And then came the dream. Jung dreams of a huge house. Every floor goes deeper. He finds bones in the basement, not those creepy kind, the symbolic kind. He tells his dude Freud that this dream proves that there is something deeper in the mind, something ancient, something collective. Freud stares at him like he just said Voldemort is real, because Freud wanted the mind to be a neat little system of repressed desires. Jung, he wanted mythology, archetype, collective unconscious, the dark side of the self, the whole psychological multiverse. Today we're diving deep into Carl Jung's analytical philosophy, a more like Carl Jung's personality theory part 1, as he would sought to find about his philosophical background and most of his theories to find out how he actually came across the idea of making the personality theory, and basically how this dramatic friendship breakup led to the biggest shifts in the psychology, from MBTI types to shadow self, from Asian gods to 16 personality discord. It all started with a dream, a boat trip, and one of the most iconic fallouts in the history of mind. Before moving towards Carl Gustav Jung, we have to talk about another guy. Right guess, Sigmund Freud, or a guy with a walrus mustache, and Jung's ex-bestie. He was built different. To understand Freud's legacy, it's important to begin with a look at his life. His experiences informed many of his theories. So learning more about his life and the time where he came from gets us a deeper understanding of his ideas, like where his theories came from. Freud was born in 1856 in a town called Freiburg in Moravia, in what is now known as Czech Republic. He was the oldest of 8 children. His family moved to Vienna several years after he was born and lived most of his life there. Freud earned a medical degree, classic, and started practicing as a doctor in Vienna. He was later appointed as a lecturer for nervous diseases at the University of Vienna in 1885. After spending time in Paris and attending lectures given by French neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot, Freud became more interested in theories explaining the human mind, which would later relate to his work in psychoanalysis. Freud eventually withdrew from academia as the Viennese medical community rejected his ideas that he brought back from Paris, specifically on what was then called hysteria. Hysteria in Victorian times expressed a number of symptoms and signs, such as hallucinations, partial paralysis, or nervousness thought to only affect the woman. Now, these are known to be common in psychological conditions, such as dissociative and somatic disorders. Somatic disorders are basically the mental health conditions where an individual faces various excessive stresses and functional impairment because of physical symptoms, and in both males and females. Hysteria is also a modern slang for the state of excessive emotion or behavior, mostly laughter and amusement. Freud and his family left Vienna in 1838 due to the discrimination against Jewish people. So he went to England in 1838 and died a year after, that's 1839. Now you would be asking, bro, why are we even studying about this man with a walrus drawstring? So certainly, Freud may have been the most controversial minds at his time. He was accused to be a genius, a madman, or both. Anyways, but his theories burrow deep into the modern psyche. Psyche means souls. Freud didn't just change modern psychology, but he also rewired how we talk about ourselves. So love him or loathe him, his ideas slipped straight into the everyday's life. Say your ex name instead of your crush, that's Freud and slip. You're unconscious talking.
According to Freud, the unconscious thoughts or feelings can transfer to the conscious mind in the form of parapraxis, properly known as the Freudian slips or the slips of the tongue. We reveal what is really into our mind by saying something we didn't mean to.
Freud believed there were no accidents but were due entirely because of the working of the unconscious. As such, they were valuable source of insights into this part of the human mind. These are more technically known as parapraxis.
For example, a nutritionalist giving a lecture intended to say that we must always demand a good bread, but instead he or she said that we must demand good bed. We just said in bed instead of bread. Another example can be when a friend calls a friend's partner and calls he or she with another name or the previous one's name, the whom they liked more.
Bury a bad memory so deep you forget it. Repression. Insist you are not jealous while obviously jealous? That's denial. And Freud would have smirked behind his cigar, raising a very smug Austrian eyebrow at you. You don't need to read Die Trauma der Tongue, I guess this is the pronunciation. Freud is already in your mind, living rent-free and whispering in German accented Latin. So how did Freud think the mind actually worked? Picture this, a chaotic Viennese opera playing in your head, starring 3 dramatic characters.
First up, we have got the ID, the pure instinct. Think, hunger, rage and desire. Totally unconscious, totally unfiltered. Then there is the ego, the conscious self, trying to keep the peace and paying the bills. And finally, the moral judge, the super ego. Yes, that inner voice whispering, you shouldn't do that.
These 3 fight, flight and wrestle constantly, and that Freud says makes you. But wait, there is more drama.
According to Freud, we're all driven by eros or the life instinct. You say love, survival or pleasure. And Thanatos, the death instinct. Yes, aggression, chaos and destruction. And a personality sculpted through 5 awkward stages of psychosexual development. That is oral, anal, phallic, latent and genital.
Anxiety. Oh, we have got tools for that too. Freud called them defense mechanisms, like repression, where you show bad memories into the basement, or sublimation, where you turn weird urges into painting or writing poetry, or I don't know, fencing. Freud's idea has such a strong impact on psychology that an entire school of thought has emerged from his ideas. That is psychoanalysis. Yes, he was also the father of psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis has had a lasting impact on both the study of psychology and the practice of psychotherapy.
Alright, I got you. You're probably thinking, Freud facts, good. But what is psychoanalysis anyways?
Psychoanalysis is a set of theories and techniques of research that deals with the unconscious mind's influence of the conscious mind. Based on talk therapy and dream interpretation, psychoanalysis is also a method for the treatment of mental disorders. Established in the early 1890s by Sigmund Freud, it takes into account Darwin's theory of evolution, neurology findings, ethnology reports, and, in some respects, the clinical research of his mentor Joseph Breuer. Ethnology is the scientific study and comparison of human races.
Now, psychoanalysis sought to bring the unconscious information to the conscious awareness in order to experience catharsis. Catharsis is basically an emotional release that may bring relief from psychological distress.
At the heart of psychoanalysis lies a foundational assumption that beneath our conscious thoughts exists a hidden world, that's the unconscious mind. According to Freud, this unconscious stores repressed memories, unresolved desires, and emotional conflicts that we were once not able to face because our ego that was too immature at the developmental phase, that is the oedipedal phase, was not able to face them or process them, or was simply not strong enough to handle them.
Freud believed that many psychological issues, often known as neurosis, stem not from conscious choices but from latent conflicts buried deep into the psyche. These often arise during childhood, especially the period he called the Oedipal phase, when children first begin to experience emotional attachments or rivalries within the family structure. When these emotional conflicts aren't resolved, they can be repressed, that is, pushed out of awareness but not from influence.
And this is where symptoms come in. To the psychoanalytical psychologist, the manifested symptoms like anxiety, compulsions, and phobias are not random. They are surface expressions of latent disturbances. Latent means hidden, that is, hidden disturbances. Repressed trauma, emotional conflicts, and the unresolved developmental stages all simmer beneath, shaping behavior in such a way that the individual is not able to understand. Psychoanalytic therapy then is not about quick fixes, nor the behavioral tricks. It's about insight. Freud believed that bringing unconscious material to conscious awareness through dialogue, free association, and dream analysis could give a cathartic experience, allowing the patient to process, integrate, and ultimately heal.
In psychoanalysis, Freud would have a patient on a couch to relax, and he would sit behind them taking notes of when they would tell about their memories, childhood memories, or their dreams. Psychoanalysis would be a lengthy process, having many sessions with the psychoanalyst.
Traditionally, during the psychoanalytic sessions, the patient lies on a couch, with the analyst seated just behind and out of the vision of the patient. This setup is believed to facilitate free association, as patient is now allowed to just freely express his feelings and how he is feeling without the immediate reaction or the perceived judgment by the therapist. The absence of face-to-face interaction is believed to help the patient to project their feelings and experiences, the transferences more easily.
The analyst is typically a blank screen, disclosing very little about themselves in order that client could use the space in the relationship to work on their unconscious without any interference from outside.
It's a common misconception. The Ink-blot test, formerly known as the Rorschach test, was not developed by Sigmund Freud. It was created by Hermann Rorschach, a Swiss psychiatrist, in 1921, several decades after Freud had already laid the foundations of his psychoanalysis. However, the Ink-blot test was inspired by Freudian ideas, especially the unconscious mind. Rorschach believed that when people interpreted ambiguous images like that Ink-blot ones, they project their unconscious thoughts, desires, and emotions onto them. This aligns with Freud's notion of projective mechanisms, where inner content is revealed through outward interpretation.
So remember, we talked a while ago about Freudian slips, those little accidental slips of the tongue that actually reveal what's buried deep in the unconscious. Yeah, Freud believed nothing is really an accident. Now, think about the Rorschach ink-blot test, those weird ambiguous ink-blot with no clear meaning. What's fascinating is about that people project their own hidden thoughts and feelings onto them. It's like a projective test because the ink-blot itself means nothing until your unconscious mind starts interpreting it. But some like B.F. Skinner say it's too subjective to count as a real science.
Then there is free association. You just say whatever comes to your mind, no filters. This helps in bringing the repressed memories to the surface. And here's the tip. If someone stops or resists or pauses while talking during this free association, that's usually a clue that they are close to something important.
Sometimes people relieve intense memories in therapy called an abreaction, which can lead to catharsis, a kind of emotional cleansing.
Freud even called dream analysis the royal road to unconscious. Dreams disguise our true feelings in symbols. So understanding the difference between what you remember, that is the manifest content, and what it really was, that is the latent content, can uncover hidden conflicts, often with a sexual test.
Lastly, transference occurs when patients unconsciously express their feelings from significant early relationships onto the therapist, while the therapist's own emotional responses, that is counter-transference, offer further insight. These dynamics are essential in recovering and resolving the emotional conflicts or the psychological conflicts in psychoanalysis.
Psychoanalysis has sparked both transformation and controversy. Research shows that it can be effective, especially when a long-term self-examination process is involved in that. And at the heart of this lies the talk therapy, perhaps Freud's major contribution and one of the major pillars in the modern therapy.
But Freud was not just talking couches and cigars. He wrote about sex, dreams, religion, and even women, though the last is where the criticism cuts deep. His ideas on hysteria, penis envy, and female psychology have rightly been challenged for their sexist bias and obviously scientific gaps. And yet, Freud's shadow still looms. Concepts like unconscious mind and defense mechanism are so embedded in pop culture that we often forget their origins. Sure, Freud's theories may not meet today's scientific standards, but as history shows, like with the leading in 18th century, a treatment doesn't have to be right to sometimes work. The utility of psychoanalysis may not rest on truth, but its application. And though its effectiveness is still debated, but Freud undeniably carved the first part in the jungle of the human mind. Carl Gustav Jung, Swiss psychologist, pioneer of personality theory, master of the mind, and part-time mystic, the man who helped develop analytical psychology, coined terms like archetypes, introversion, and complex, basically walked into the early 1900s saying, hey, what if the soul mattered? Yep, the word psychology comes from the word psych. That's a Greek word, which means soul in English. And that's exactly where Jung aimed his telescope. While others were dissecting behaviors, Jung was peering into dreams, myths, and the depth of the human spirit, like an old and intellectual shaman. Sure, modern psychologists roll their eyes on his ambiguity. The man was not allergic to metaphors, but his work still echoes through the self-helps and the therapy rooms in the modern days also. Carl Gustav Jung was not just an old shrink. He was a radical, a rebel, and a revolutionary who forged his own path in understanding the depth of psyche. While others mapped the surface, Jung was spelunking the depth of unconscious. Flashlight in one hand and Asian myths in the other. And get this, terms like introverts and extroverts, you have probably used them 100 times without realizing. They are his. His system of thought helped thousands directly and inspired millions of more. From therapists to filmmakers to meme pages like Your Inner Child, Jung is everywhere. Born on July 26, 1875, near Lake Constance in Switzerland, Jung came into the world the son of a village pastor, which in hindsight makes sense. The man spent half of his life debating God, dreams, and the meaning of everything. He got married in 1903, had 5 kids, trained as a psychiatrist, and started working at Burgherzli Hospital in Zurich. It was there that Jung stumbled upon Freud's work, and let's just say it was love at first psychoanalysis. The two began corresponding, and cue the montage. They teamed up to promote psychoanalysis. Back then, when it was the edgy, misunderstood rock star of the psychology, Freud even called Jung his higher. But as with all great romances, it fell apart. In 1913, Freud and Jung split apart, dramatically, irreversibly. Why? Because Jung had ideas of his own, the big ones, spiritual ones, some say weird ones. And he just couldn't fit into Freud's strictly sexual and strictly scientific framework. So yeah, the breakup, it broke Jung, sent him spiraling into what he later called his creative illness, basically a psychological meltdown that fortunately birthed the cornerstones of analytical psychology. Yeah, Jung really said, let me build a psychological empire from my existential crisis. But he was no saint. Jung was a complex and controversial figure. Literally, his autobiography, memories, dreams, reflections was actually dictated to his assistant, Anelda Jaffe, who edited out anything she found inappropriate. So, yikes. He had a difficult relationship with women, and his alleged anti-Semitism during the war years, that's been extensively debated. He died in Kursnacht, Switzerland on June 6, 1961, but the legacy is still very much alive, from the Society of Analytical Psychology to YouTube explainers. Jung's fingerprints are everywhere. Now you might be wondering why Freud and Jung? Because while Freud was obsessed with childhood and drives, Jung brought mysticism into the mix. He took the psychodynamic theory and said, let's add dreams, spirituality, physics, ancient myths and evolution, and the room became more than silent. An early supporter of Freud, Jung eventually disagreed away too many things to stay under Freud's umbrella. So he stepped out and developed a theory that managed natural laws, like physics with psychological growth. He even introduced personality types and started mapping how people evolve psychologically throughout their lifespan. But maybe his wildest idea, that a psyche holds constructs inherited from the evolution of a species. In other words, we are born with ancient psychological pattern inside us.
Your dreams might just be ancient echoes from humanity's past.
Of course, all this made him deeply controversial, as psychologists who wanted to be deeply scientific were not thrilled by his idea of blending mythology, religion, and psychology. He quoted Bhagavad Gita, explored alchemy, and also was not shy from spiritual texts.
Freud was devastated. No worse, he was betrayed. But that wasn't always the case. Back in 1907, Freud saw Jung as the chosen one, the higher of the psychoanalysis. He literally wrote this glowing fatherly letter. I now know that I am dispensable like everyone else, and I wish for no one other or better than you to continue and complete my work. Pause, that's not just praise, that's literally Freud saying, take the throne, man, take the throne. By 1910, he was campaigning for Jung like a publicist on an overdrive. He wrote to Oscar Pfister, I want him to acquire the authority that will entitle him to leadership of the whole movement. Sounds like a bromance for the ages, right? Well, fast forward to just 3 years, the tone flips so hard that it feels like the origin of a villain movie. Let's end this private relationship. I lose nothing. I have been bound to you only by the thin thread of previous disappointments. Spare me the supposed duties of friendship. Oh, that's so cold. That's not just a breakup, it's a controlled detonation of friendship. In 1922, almost a decade later, he's still talking about Jung in letters. This time thanking the Pfister to help erase the Jung's influence. Your dismissal of Jung and Adler has given me great satisfaction. Bro was petty to the grave.
But here's the kicker. Behind all this letter writing and intellectual posturing, there was something really important. The real emotional pain. The collapse of mentorship, the failure of legacy handoff, and the loss of someone Freud trusted more than himself. What started as respect turned into rivalry. And that rivalry didn't just broke a friendship, it reshaped the entire direction of modern philosophy.
If Sigmund Freud was the king of psychoanalysis, then Carl Jung was the crown prince. The two started as allies, mind blazing through uncharted territory in the early days of psychology. But they didn't stay allies for long, but rather they became bitter enemies. And yet, almost every other personality theory that came after just echoes of what Freud and Jung built.
An international authority of personality assessment and the founder of Huygens Assessments once said Freud and Jung are the Plato and Aristotle of the personality psychology. Big claim, but you will see how it sticks. Because if you really want to understand how we went from the dream interpretation to Myers-Briggs model of personality test, it all starts with Carl Jung.
So who was Jung? Jung was an intuitive introvert, a Swiss psychiatrist, somebody who cared less about academic status and more about the soul of human experience. Meanwhile, Freud, a rationalist, a man obsessed with legacy, control and building a psychological empire. The tension was inevitable.
At first, Jung was Freud's chosen one, the higher to psychoanalysis. But Jung's idea took a turn, a very mystical, mythological turn. He started writing about archetypes, the unconscious, myth, religion. And Freud, not a fan.
See, Freud wanted psychology to be science, hard, tested, and grounded. Jung, he thought of soul. Psyche in the original German was something deeply concerned and central to human development. Well, the Freudians, they went after Jung hard. They wrecked his reputation so badly. It's literally limits how seriously we study his analytical philosophy today.
But here's the thing, Jung kept going. He kept writing, he kept researching, he kept digging into the weird, mysterious and symbolic parts of our minds that Freud refused to touch. A divine child, humble beginnings, hidden powers, sudden fame, and then betrayal, sacrifice. It's like the same myth copy-pasted in human history. Jung believed that it's no coincidence, it's just collective unconscious at the work.
Okay, but hold up. What is collective unconscious? It's Jung's most famous and most controversial idea. The idea that beneath your personal unconscious, like your childhood memories, your childhood crush, or the weird fear of public speaking, there is a deeper layer. A shared layer formed because of the thousands of years of evolution. A kind of psychological fossil record.
Freud said that religion was delusion, just mass projection of childhood needs. Jung, he took it very serious. To him, religion was not about God or dogma, it was about meaning. Jung believed that there are three core motivations: getting along, getting ahead, and finding meaning.
And religion, it hits all three. It gives us a moral community that is getting along, a path to virtue or status, getting ahead, and answers to life's deepest questions, that is the meaning. Even if you're not religious, philosophy, history, or politics would do same things for you psychologically.
Jung was mystical, but that doesn't mean he was irrational. He applied natural laws, even physics, to the mind. He introduced personality types. He changed the way we talk about introversion, extroversion, the soul, shadows, and all.
And maybe, just maybe, that's why his ideas still echo. Not just in textbook, in therapies, in comic books, and in culture.
Carl Jung was not just a psychologist. He was a myth maker, a soul mapper, and maybe the most quietly radical mind in all of the 20th century psychology.
In my opinion, religion is essentially a Asian mythology. Stories crafted to help people understand morality, ethics, and the purpose of life. During time when scientific reasoning and self-awareness were limited. It wasn't originally meant to glorify one supreme entity or divide people on the basis of rigid rituals and identities, as is often the case today in organized religions including Christianity or Hinduism. Instead, it emerged as a way to give meaning to existence and guide early societies.
Yes, I know. This viewpoint is aligned with scholars like Joseph Campbell, who believe that myths and religious stories are just metaphors for human experience. Also, thinkers like Yuval Noah argues that religions are a broader category under shared myth that held early Homo sapiens to just cooperate in large numbers, right?
So, let's talk legacy because Jung's fingerprints are everywhere. You know those personality tests that your friend send you at 3 am like, lol bro, I'm an INFP. What about you? Yeah, that's Jung, a sort of. See, Carl Jung didn't invented Myers-Briggs type indicator, but he kind of gave it a soul. While comparing his mind with Freud and another guy named Alfred Adler, whom we will get later, Jung basically noticed something really interesting.
Freud was all inward, obsessive, reflective, like a dude trapped in his own brain. Adler, total opposite, outward facing, obsessed with status, power, how people act in society, and Jung was like,
Wait, there is something deeper going on here. Some people are outward, some are inward. Some people process facts like they're objective, others lie with the meaning. Some with truth, others with significance. Some are sensors, others are intuitives. It's not just quicks, it's patterns.
That becomes the root idea behind the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which takes Jung's original insights and breaks them down into 4 different dimensions, like how we gather, analyze, and respond to our information.
And Jung doesn't hear just vibes and metaphors. He also created the word association test. You hear a word, you say the first thing that comes to your mind, and that's it. Why? Because the unconscious doesn't lie, it leaks.
Even today, that simple test is used in clinical psychology to explore people's hidden thoughts, fears, or traumas. But here's the part that most people miss. While modern psychologists treat personality a thing that leads you to think and the way you behave and you respond, Jung flips it. He says the way you process information is your personality. That subtle shift changes everything.
Because for Jung, personality was not about labels or fixed traits. It was about how your mind makes sense of the world, how you feel truth, how you perceive meaning. As Dr. Hogan puts it, all personality psychology can be seen as an extended footnote to Freud and Jung. They were not just theorists, they were the blueprints.
I understand this may feel very overwhelming, so many concepts, states, and developments. You might be wondering how these all ideas come together. When exactly was the 16 personality framework established then? Don't worry, I have got you covered. Let's take a step back and just walk through a concise timeline of Carl Jung's contributions and dates and developments that he made. and how basically it turned and evolved into the personality type systems that we recognize today. So how Carl Jung just moved from that guy Fred ghosted me to literally inventing how we recognize personality today.
Well, let's rewind to 1904 then, when our boy Jung was just a Swiss boy, a Swiss lad with a thick mustache, and a deeper fascination with the unconscious than most of the people have with their crush's Instagram feed. He teamed up with Eugene Bleuler. Yeah, I sound like a wizard, but he was a psychiatrist. To experiment with word associations. Jung's idea that those little word slips would reveal your emotional complexes, aka your brain's secret stash of unsorted emotional junk. Like if I say father and use a resentment, Jung would lean back, stroke his European mustache and go, huh, classic, unresolved parental trauma. It's spicy.
Fast forward to 1921, Jung drops his psychology banger, psychological types. Here he introduces a revolutionary idea, that is, people actually experience realities differently. Not wrong, not weird, just different.
He splits folks into two energy zones: introverts, who gain energy from vibing alone with books and existential dread, and extroverts, who get energy from people, parties, and talking over you in group projects.
Each of us have a dominant function, kind of like having a main Pokemon, and that shapes how we interpret the world. Now here is where it gets juicy. Enters Catherine Briggs and Isabel Briggs Mayer, a mother-daughter duo with enough personality obsession that they could just fill the entire Tumblr archive. In 1943 they were like, okay, Jung's ideas are brilliant, but what if we can make them user-friendly or printable and something that HR department can weaponize? Boom! Finally the MBTI was born, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, a fancy name for a personality quiz that would be the BuzzFeed for the later psychology.
By 1962, MBTI is officially published by the Educational Testing Service, the same folks who tortured high schoolers with standardized tests. And in 1998, they dropped the form as M, which is the glow-up version of today's personality test.
So what's the deal with the 16 personality types?
Basically, the MBTI sorts us into four main categories based on these four criteria. So, first of all, is E or I, that is extroversion and introversion. S or I, that is sensing and intuiting. T or F, that is thinking and feeling. And at last, it's J or P, that is judging and perceiving.
So, for example, if you're INFJ, congrats. You're a philosophical dreamer with too many unread books and existential crisis at 3 a.m. Well, if you're an ESTP, then you probably wrestle beers in the weekend and ask zero follow-up questions in the weekdays. His mustache may be gone, his ghost may be sipping espresso in the collective unconscious, but every time someone says, I am such an ENFP, lol, Carl Jung chuckles somewhere in the archetypal heavens.
Understanding your personality, it's not just some productivity hack for LinkedIn bros, it's a rebellion. It's a cold middle finger in every system that told you to stay in your lane, to pick one path, to stick to one version of yourself, to be consistent, not complex. But guess what? You are allowed to shift, to grow. To say I thought I was an INFJ but a low-key now vibe with the energy of an ENTP. You're allowed to make your career pivot at 16 or 40 or whenever that inner voice becomes too loud to ignore.
Because becoming yourself isn't a one-time test. It's a forever remix, a conscious integration of the unconscious, as Jung would say, but like without losing your edge. It's shadow work and slay.
So yeah, understand your personality, but don't let it cage you. Let it be a map, not a prison. And as you evolve, remember, you're not here to fit a mold, you're here to break the algorithm. Even if that algorithm is inside your own brain.
So go on, lad. Unlearn, relearn, or maybe reinvent. Stay introspective, stay you, stay weird, whatever your heart desires. Catch you in the next one.